Welcome to the Bellevue Chamber webcast for Thursday, May 7th. Today we're joined by Secretary Ross Hunter, Superintendent Duran, and Gays Foundation Officer Linsday Hunsicker, and we explore the future of education.
Well, welcome, and thank you again for being here for another Chamber webcast. I'm President and CEO of the Bellevue Chamber, Joe Fain, and it's a real honor to have you with us for the next hour. This is the 9th program in our ongoing series to explore the important issues facing our recovery and our community. And I want to start by thanking today's program sponsor, Puget Sound Energy, for their support in bringing this important information to our members and the public. And it's my honor at this time to introduce by audio Bellevue Chamber board member and no stranger to the small screen, Puget Sound Energy's Vice President for Communications and Customer Operations, Andy Wobbler. Andy, are you with us? Oh no, we had Andy and then we lost Andy. Well, hopefully we'll be able to get him back here in just a moment because it's really important that we hear from our sponsors, especially one that's been at the forefront of keeping our facilities up and running, our homes powered, and our remote work possible. I believe he had some internet trouble at home himself, but we also know that so many of our systems nowadays are just getting taxed to the max during these at-home work times. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to our first speaker, who is certainly no stranger to the East Side. But first, I want to remind you that, of course, the magic of these webcasts come from the interaction that they provide when you're able to ask questions and talk to the presenter directly. So please use the Q&A function on your screen to send in the questions that matter most to you and your organization. Now, with public schools headed into their 3rd month of closure and many children's facilities affected by the stay-at-home order, our education system has had to adapt and reform itself overnight. How long will this last? Is there a new normal in education around the corner? And when will my 4-year-old stop making that noise while I'm on conference calls? Well, maybe we've assembled a great panel of experts to help us answer some of those questions here this afternoon. And we begin with the first and only person to lead the Washington Department of Children and Youth and Families, former State Representative Ross Hunter. Ross, welcome. Now I know we have Ross.
All right, the microphone's on. Now I got to turn the camera on. I'm Ross Hunter. Many of you have seen me before. I used to represent Bellevue in the legislature. Thank you, Joe, for not reading that horrendous biography that my assistant insists on sending out with 400 words. And I have some slides that I'm going to present. If I am successful. Wrong. Oh, here we go. Childcare. So what Joe asked me to talk about was not the long-term future of childcare forever and ever, but more about the will my 4-year-old stop making that noise on the webcam for the next however long we are modified in the pandemic. And you're going to hear from a lot of people today about how long this might last. And honestly, I don't know. I'm not an epidemiologist, and I, unlike lawyers and economists and stuff, I used to play one on TV. I actually don't do epidemiology. So I think it'll be a while, though, before we're completely back to normal. And based on what we're learning, normal may look kind of different when we're done, because some stuff actually works kind of well. So I'm going to start with what happened a month ago when people all of a sudden started getting freaked out. And then the governor, we actually have a real pandemic, and then the governor issued his order to close pretty much everything down. So if you're a childcare provider in that world, demand all of a sudden cratered, whether you were open or not. our guidance to people was please stay open because the essential workers needed to work. But demand just cratered, particularly for our private pay ones. Anyone where people could work at home, they were mostly keeping their kids at home, regardless of whether their childcare was open or not. In addition, costs increased. Personal protective equipment is expensive. The last time I looked at one of the state sit reps, we'd spent over $350 million on gloves and masks and stuff, and this stuff's being delivered in pallets. And of course, it's absurdly expensive right now. The other thing in the big cost issue for childcare providers is group size reductions. The Department of Health guidance, which is the same as the CDC guidance, is that group sizes should be 10 or fewer. And most early learning center classrooms are bigger than that, maybe up to 20 in a room. And so all of a sudden you have half as many rooms as you needed, and you need more adults, depending on the age group of kids. The providers also, many of them are in one of the risk categories. The reason I'm working in my spare bedroom is because I'm in one of the risk categories as someone who survived a stem cell transplant a decade ago. So all of these things together resulted in a pretty drastic decline in supply. And so I'm going to show you, we've been tracking the data on this. We have two different data systems for this, and they mostly line up. There's some differences. We're still trying to figure out why they're different. These are three different kinds of childcare providers. The dark bar at the bottom are childcare centers. Think the KinderCares of the world. And so we saw a decline there. You see a 35-40% decline in the number of centers. The middle bar is family childcare homes. You see a decline there as well, from about 3,000 to about 2,700. So a 10% decline, a much sort of smaller percentage decline. And the top one are what we would call school age programs. So these are places like the Boys and Girls Clubs, and they fell a little bit over half. But those are distorting where the kids actually are. So this is the decline that we've seen in the licensed capacity. So this is, if each of these providers was completely full, this is how many kids they would have. This is how many they're allowed to have. And so we went from about 150,000 licensed spots down to about 110. And what you'll see, and the reason I got these charts last week was, for the first time, we're starting to see retrograde motion. So it dropped to a nadir of about like 70,000 slots in centers, and has now inched back up by about 3,000. And so we're seeing some churn in there, as if a particular center has an active case, they will need to close for some period of time, do the deep cleaning. There's a protocol from the CDC that they have to go through. So we're seeing some closing and reopening of provider capacity. Most of these providers are pretty empty, though. Not all of them, but pretty empty. This slide, I don't know why there's a question mark at the title. All I know how to do in slides is do the black words on the white background. And so somebody adds these random pictures in and the purple bars and stuff. I don't know why they added a question mark, because this is stuff we did to try and do emergency surgery on the system. Many of the workers, low-wage workers, get subsidized childcare through the state. These are people who will make up to, say, $35,000, $40,000 for a family of three, varies with family size. We stabilized the revenue to providers that were serving subsidized children by switching from attendance-based payments to enrollment-based payments. So your enrollment as of the 1st of March, kids would come and go, and we just started paying it like tuition instead of trying to track attendance and pay for that. We also converted all of the half-day allocations to full day because the kids were out of school. They needed a full day of care. The thing I didn't put on the slide was we also waived copays for parents who were engaged in the childcare to try and make it so that the providers had revenue. Because when we come out of this and when school returns to something closer to normal, we're going to need to have a childcare industry and keeping our providers stable. Now, this affects providers who serve subsidized kids, which is half of providers. For all of the providers, we reduce some regulatory burdens. One of the things that's a little controversial is we made it so that we'll still take in fingerprints from people who work in childcare centers, but we're now letting them start work if they're supervised prior to the fingerprint coming back, because that system got way slow because all the fingerprint vendors shut down. We relaxed our licensing requirements, particularly for childcare that was being offered in school buildings, because we wanted to stand up as much emergency childcare for healthcare workers as we could. School buildings are remarkably safe, and we've been working pretty hard to work our way out of having to do licensing in school buildings, because I think the schools ought to be able to handle that themselves. They're essentially a local government, and they can be responsible for the safety. We can give them guidelines. So we're working on that. I don't show it in the data, but many fewer subsidized providers closed than private pay providers. There's lots of moving parts in that I don't really have time to do today. Super interesting as to why, but we're trying to keep that capacity open and financially stable so that we can have an industry when the demand comes back. So the demand is going to come back. I don't know when, and I'm not the guy to tell you what the rules are or when that will change. We will not be able to reopen the economy unless we have adequate childcare. People in the medical system, which we were worried about in the beginning, tell us that when they have a snow day, they will often lose 20% of their nursing staff because they don't have childcare for the day. So we wanted to have that not happen. That has not been a problem in the medical system. They've been adequately staffed. We were terrified that we were going to have a New York experience. The social distancing has been adhered to, and is actually, we have not had a hospital problem. The problems that they do have, though, are the lack of personal protective equipment. Again, this is getting better. We're starting to see it come through. Lack of demand. Providers are not going to open until there's demand for the slots. So we've got to ratchet that up slowly. And the group size limits is going to drive the cost. And so it's just harder and harder and harder to do. My wife is the CFO at a local Montessori school. And so I'm watching her try and figure out the economics of, well, how many classrooms do we open? How many kids do we have in each? How do we keep them from running into each other? They're trying to redo the fall planning. And I think you'll hear the same problem at a bigger scale from Dr. Duran. We are doing more things about this. There's a rate increase that will take effect on July 1st that will take people to the 65th percentile. Costs are going up. We need to make sure that the payments that we put out for subsidized kids are actually keep up with the cost of providing care, or we won't lose that. And I'm trying to finish because that's the hint that Joe's sending me in the chat bar. So we're also doing tracking availability real time. And we have a site that does this, and we are doing some internal mapping. And I'm not going to drill into this in detail. This shows childcare centers and outdoor pre-K. It does not show family childcare centers because we have some privacy restrictions. We can't show their address in public. But this is the statewide look. And then you can look and see, this is a drill down into Puget Sound. The power of Tableau is fabulous, and we can actually track. We did this so that we could track childcare availability near healthcare centers. So we're really trying to get coverage everywhere that we can. We are worried about pre-K, and yes, these slides are available. I'm happy to send them out. We don't want to lose focus on the high quality pre-K for at-risk kids. Washington State's program is excellent and shows lasting educational gains into the 5th grade. And we stopped doing the tracking at that point. So it's not like it ends at the 5th grade. We're expecting a significant space problem in the fall. I'm expecting K-12 to use more of their space, and we're trying to resolve this problem now. So I think we have some partnering opportunities with private providers, and the budget impact on pre-K programs is going to be the same as it is on childcare, plus the state's budget is about to have an unpleasant experience, a redo of what I had to do when I was the budget chairman in the last recession. We're exploring some opportunities around online learning. This is not really my part to talk about here. There's some exciting things that K-12 can do. This is not super interesting for 3-year-olds. They might want to watch Barney on TV, but they don't learn anything on TV the way that they learn from human beings. And we're also worried about at-risk students. Our responsibilities also include foster care. And so we have about 3,000 foster students who are 12 to 20. And I am very worried that the online learning experience is not going to serve them well. All the evidence nationally is that this does not work well for that population. There you go. Hope I didn't run over too much, Joe.
A quick question here that it's going to be, purely a selfish question. What kind of recommendations are you going to expect, pre-vaccination, but when daycare centers are open back up, but perhaps you've got...
So here's a question from Lindsay. Were any ECAP programs able to pivot to an online environment, knowing that it is not the best option, but better than no learning? ECAP programs like Head Start, we have about 13,000 kids statewide in ECAP, combine both a classroom experience and a wraparound anti-poverty program that helps parents learn a lot of critical economic skills. And both aspects work super well. Unfortunately, 80% of our facilities that we use for that are not available. A lot of them are in school buildings that are closed. And so we are not able to provide a lot of the classroom option today. And no, we do not have an online option for 3 and 4-year-olds. It really doesn't work well for 3 and 4-year-olds. We'll try. I can't hear anything.
Ross?
Oh, there we go. Now I can hear you.
One of the questions that I had there was about older guardians or individuals that there might be a younger student, a early childhood education student in the same house as someone who is medically fragile or who has older guardians, maybe grandparents. It is your expectation that folks in that situation will probably have to keep their kids out of the education system for fear of what they might bring home, or is there are there alternatives that are being considered?
Well, we're going to do, in order to have classroom-based early learning work well at scale when school starts again, we're going to need to have ways to have regular testing of teachers, just like we do with healthcare providers. We're going to have screening for all of the kids and for the staff. And I think people are going to have to make choices about do they send their kids into school, or of having children not get an education are pretty horrific, as are the consequences for obviously the health consequences. Those are challenges people are going to have to work out on their own. I do not know how to resolve that issue.
Well, we'll have more questions for Ross here as we get towards the end of the panel, because I know there are more folks that are interested in talking about early childhood education. But Ross, thanks so much for the presentation. But I want to quickly move on to explore the impacts on our K-12 system here locally. So it's my honor to welcome Bellevue Superintendent Ivan Duran. Dr. Duran has led the Bellevue Schools since July of 2017, and before that, he was Deputy Superintendent of the Dallas Independent School District in Texas. I know that he, like many of our other education leaders in the area, have been incredibly busy trying to adapt on a day-by-day basis. And so, Dr. Duran, we appreciate you taking time to be with us today.
Wonderful. Just really want to thank you, Joe, and Chamber Board for allowing me to have this opportunity. I always love the chance to be able to talk about our school district. And of course, my favorite topic, is education and social justice as a whole. So if we can pull up my slides, that would be great, and I can get going. There we go, great. So it's really hard to believe that we are 8 weeks into this process, and it's really hard to imagine everything that we've been through to this point. But I'm going to share with you just a little bit of experience what we've experienced over the last 8 weeks, and then I'm going to dive just a little bit briefly into kind of like what we're thinking and give you some ideas around this idea around the future of education. So first off, I just personally just want to share, that this is not a new normal. It's really I'm not sure what the new normal is going to look like, but this opportunity has been, quite the challenge for many people, for all of us in many different ways. My wife is a education consultant, and she's used to working in this remote environment and being at home and really, managing her time and work. And for me, it was something new. I've never thought about myself being a virtual superintendent. So it has been, really a unique experience to be able to go through. It also has been a lot of blessings. And I think many of you know that I have a young son at home, Mateo, who turned 15 months very recently. But it's been great just to be able to go up and watch him, on the day-to-day experiences. Just last week, he started walking. And so it was just really great to be able to see some of those big milestones. And then many of you are familiar with Seward Park. This is a picture. I often go and run there with Mateo. And, we're just not used to seeing people. We're used to seeing people all over that park. And this is just one of those eerie moments I had when I was running, where there was literally nobody around, and it was a really just unique experience. So this is definitely not a new normal. And then I just put a little quick Twitter post there from Cheryl Strahan, author of the book Wild, because I just love this post, because when we first got started, just best line from the school's principal, this whole idea that it's important to get out of bed when joining class, help you focus, insert and retain information. So there's a lot of humor, in this work, but we also know that it's also been incredibly challenging, for both our educators and our students. I've been reluctant to actually use the term online learning. We have continually focused and talked about continuous learning or remote learning, because this idea and belief that we could just turnkey the brick and mortar school system, and replicate what we're able to do, in our regular schools is just not possible, so just really want to be mindful of that. So I'm just going to quickly shift now, so about 8 weeks ago, our state superintendent, Chris Reichdale, directed us to close. We had already made the decision the day earlier to have that closure happen. We had been thinking about closing because we had, just a lot of issues going on. We had quite a few students out, and one of the days before we closed, we had about 22% of our staff members out. So this was impacting us in really big ways. But this was the guidance that we received in terms of what we needed to do as an educational system: meals, childcare, focus on our graduating seniors, think about learning opportunities, and PD for our staff, and then really make sure that we are keeping our employees whole as best as possible. We also had a number of priorities on March 12th when we closed. We not only took the pieces that came from, the state office of the superintendent, but we also wanted to ensure that we were still focused around equity and access for all of our students, knowing that it was going to be very variable. There was going to be a lot of variety in terms of what our students were going to experience, what our educators were going to experience. And so these are just some key things that were really driving a lot of work that we were thinking about during that time. We have really done a lot of work in the area of providing nutrition to our families. And you can see on this graph that this is data up until last week, but we have served over 68,000 meals. We now have 6 grab-and-go locations where families and students can come pick up lunch for that day and then breakfast for the next day. We have 33 locations where we go and we actually deliver food to families and students. And so last week is we experienced the highest number of meals that we've ever served, and we're now averaging about 2,000 meals a day, impacting over 1,000 of our students. So this is an area that has been huge and growing since we closed, and I anticipate this to be an area that we will continue to focus on in the future. We also focused on childcare, and we were fortunate in the Bellevue schools because we already have a childcare program. We operate before and after school care, so we were able to get our staff shifted and ready to go when we announced the closure. We were expecting to have up to 200 students at 4 different locations, but after the governor closed some of the essential close some businesses, and especially some of the hourly businesses like our restaurants and bars, we did not have the same number of the need that we were expecting. So we are currently serving about 100 students. We are now at one of our locations. We follow all the physical distance guidelines. If you were going to visit one of our centers, you would have to have your temperature checked. You'd have a number of questions you'd go through. You'd have to put on a mask and sanitize your hands, even just to visit. So we're really doing a great job in that area. And then I just want to also shout out our Boys and Girls Club, because they've been doing a lot of work in this area and been really an essential partner for us in providing and ensuring that our families and students have the support that they need. We also have been really, it has been surprising for a district that had a one-to-one laptop program and all of our secondary students with laptops, the high number of laptops that we've distributed. And a lot of this is from our elementary age students, but up to this point, we have distributed over 3,000 laptops and over 435 hotspots. We are still providing on-site technology support, because even though we added technology into the hands of many of our students and families, a lot of our students, especially our families, do not know how to use technology. And the idea of actually being able to get on, open up a computer, plug in a hotspot and get connected. It may sound easy if you've done it before, if you do that on a day-to-day basis, but if you've never done that before, it was a real challenge. So we are really ensuring that we're providing continued support in that area, and ensuring that we have hotlines so that multiple languages can be addressed. I love the quote from our technology department, because they basically just talked about, the walls of our physical building do not define us. It is you, our team, working together that have made a huge difference, and they have made a huge difference. And then I would just say that, the need for Wi-Fi access as a basic right has really come up as a really big, injustice during this time. We, have distributed quite a few of the hotspots, but we really do need to have more people who are providing this basic right to our families and our students. And I just want to quickly say that, we've been talking with Brad Miyake, the city manager of Bellevue, and talking about, as part of the smart city plan, how we can even make it smarter by ensuring that we have Wi-Fi for all of our families. I do want to just make a quick note around, we have many of our transportation drivers who are, out delivering meals, delivering packets in our community, following all the physical distancing guidelines. And when they're not doing that, they're doing some deep clean and sanitizing, so you can see their outfits and all the safety equipment that they put on. We have really been working to support our seniors. That is one of the big areas that the state superintendent asked us to do. We have taken this on, and this has been one area where we have just really been able to put all of our staff in focus to support our seniors. We did a town hall for them a couple of weeks ago. Our individual schools are working with district leadership and student leadership to really start thinking about, what does graduation look like? Is it going to be virtual? What's prom going to look like? What other kind of events will there be? But we also want to ensure that we are supporting our seniors to ensure that they graduate. So we have a lot of effort in this area, so we can ensure our students have that opportunity to get across, if it's a virtual stage or a physical stage at one point, but we're really empowering our students in our schools to make that decision, because our seniors are being impacted in a great way. And I don't think any one of them started this year thinking that this was going to be the situation they were going to be dealing with. And after 13 years of education, having this moment, in many cases, being taken away from them is really disheartening. So we're really doing everything we can to support them. We recently have been distributing some senior signs to all of our students so they can place, in their yards, their house windows, whatever works for them, just to honor and recognize them. So if you're out in the community, you see one of those signs, make sure you honk your horn and just recognize our seniors for their efforts. We did launch a remote learning plan. We have some really strong plans in place at both the elementary level and our secondary level. I would say we probably have had more success at the secondary level just because of the students being used to using technology and getting online and using that. It's probably been a greater challenge for our elementary students and especially our early learners. And, I've had the opportunity to talk to a number of not only our educators who have students at home, but our family members who have students at home, and trying to do a job and provide an education to your student. And it's been a real challenge. So I think this has just spoken volumes around how important education is to our society and how important our educators are to ensure that we are able to support this economy in many ways. And this is just a really quick highlight of our secondary learning plan. We really have spent a time thinking about what are the essential learning standards that we want our students to be prepared for next year. And so that has allowed us to really focus during this time, so our students can understand what's expected of them. Our educators can know what to deliver to our students. And we know it hasn't been perfect, but we definitely feel it's been good. And there's a lot of different issues for why it's been good, but I do think that we're doing the best we can given these circumstances. And I'm personally very proud of our staff and our educators and the work that we've done here in Bellevue to ensure that our students have some semblance of remote learning. And then the other part I think is real important is that we have been surveying our students, our families, and our educators and staff. And we have really focused our survey around just how people are doing. For the very beginning, we have led out with the words around kindness, compassion, and grace. Everybody's situation is different. Everyone's experience is different. And we just really need to be incredibly compassionate. We are seeing that the connection that school provides is something that we may have understated in many ways, and it's really coming out in these surveys and the information that we're finding out. So we're asking, our students and our families and our educators around just like, how are they doing? What's working, what's not working for them? And really just some really big highlights around this is that, our students are definitely being impacted, socially, emotionally. A large number of them indicated feeling sad and lonely, feeling overwhelmed and a little frustrated. And so, I think the remote learning is helping many students feel connected to their teachers, but we really realized during this, analyzing this information that we need to do a better job of helping our students feel connected to each other. We do ask our students, when we do this survey, which is about every 3 weeks, our next one will come out next week, just how their learning is going at home. You can see it seems to be a little bit better in our through the 5th grade range and not as good as our 12th grade and our seniors, but that's because a number of reasons came out. The last time we did this survey, we were just finalizing our remote learning plan and getting really clear on what the expectations were and what we would have happening. And so these were just some of the highlights around what we learned in that survey. For our elementary students, nothing really seemed to be hard for them, but a lot of them are really struggling with that motivation, didn't feel like learning from home. I think the social construct of education is important, whether it's how students learn from each other or how they're motivated by wanting to please the educator and just show up and do a great job. But we also know that none of our students weren't sure around exactly what our educators wanted or expected of them. So we are learning in this process, and it's helping us to make adjustments as we go through this into the future. The other thing I think I'll just add on here is that we are now really thinking about what is the future of education. I know one of the questions that came in is, if we want working parents to return to work as the open economy, we need to give their kids a place to go. If schools, childcare, anything like restaurants, we need to double the space. And then the question goes on to who's on point to figure this out. The governor's plan does not speak to school openings. And so we know we'll get some guidance from the State Office of Public Instruction from our State Superintendent, Chris Reichtel. They are convening a group right now to start having conversations around just learning from around the world and around the country around what are we going to do when we come back. We know it will look different. We know it will look significantly different. And in the Bellevue School District, we are actually starting this work next week. We are bringing a collaborative group of people to come together, which is representative of our central office staff, school leaders, and educators, and some of our hourly staff, just to come and start doing some rapid design thinking. And the 4 areas that we're going to be focusing on is what's it going to look like if we have physical distance guidelines in place. If that's the recommendation that is coming down from the Department of Health and the State Office of Instruction around curbing the spread of COVID-19, what will our educational experience need to look like? We are also going to be looking at what if we have to continue in our current scenario, which is basically remote learning. What has been working? What are the things we need to adjust? And so we're going to have that group look at that piece. The third area is I anticipate that there'll be a second wave of COVID-19 sometime next year. And so what can we do to be better ahead of the curve so that we're not reacting as much and can actually be better planned and more strategic around how we enter this when we do have to close again in the future, if this continues to be a health crisis that we have to face. And then the final one that I think is important is that we really have learned a lot during this time. And just as a really simple example, how we can reorient the use of our staff, our support for our seniors, our special education students, and our multi-language learners is really wonderful. And part of that is because we're taking some of our hourly staff and having them do some work to support our students by calling them and really giving them purpose during this time frame. But we are thinking about, staggered schedules. We may have to have a different type of calendar. We may need to think about how we can add more collaboration time for our educators, how we do a better job of connecting our students. The idea around competency-based education, standards-based grading, project-based learning. There's a lot of different ideas that are out there. And if you just did a Google search on, reopening schools, a lot of people are starting to put their ideas and opinions out there. So we're going to learn from what people are talking about right now, but we definitely will have a plan here very soon that we can share based on the guidance that we'll be receiving. And then the final thing I'll just share, this is a New York Times opinion piece by Thomas Friedman. It just really struck me, but one of the pieces in his opinion piece was, they'll also be the leaders who go to extremes to protect those among us who are vulnerable and support those among us who are risking their lives so everyone else can get back to theirs. So just as a reminder, there's, I always think about, our families who struggle the most, our students who struggle the most, are we doing everything we can to support them? And then, are we doing everything we can to support our people on the front line, our healthcare workers, frontline, safety workers, our fire, staff. I mean, everybody that has just been doing the work, there's just a lot of people that have been trying to support all this work. So as leaders, we have a huge responsibility to ensure that we are doing our best to support them. So I'll be happy to take some questions now. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Duran. You have really done yeoman's work over the last couple of months, and I know that you've had some help doing it as well from, some of the folks that are on the line right now that are from the nonprofit community, like Bellevue LifeSpring and other organizations that have been so supportive of finding ways to get resources and food and other things to the kids in our district. A couple questions that also came in that I think are kind of interesting. One is, as we think about next year and the start of school and what that might look like, and you talked a little bit about staggered schedules and this and that, is there any discussion about starting the school year earlier or later or changing when those dates are? And also what kind of education services might be provided now over the summer months that may not have been available before?
Yeah, so we definitely are thinking about that. As I said, we're going to be starting some planning next week in this area. And we are really trying to empower some of our people that have been on the field, doing this on a day-to-day basis. And so we don't have anything concrete yet to share, but I do anticipate that we could be looking at, again, staggered schedules, different start times. And so we are definitely considering that. One thing that has really been striking to me is that this has been a great disturbance for us. This has disturbed not only the educational realm, it's disturbed the business realm in many ways. So we have to use this as an opportunity to think about, what are some of the other things that we're doing. So, I really have been encouraged people to be asking the question around, what if we're actually able to think about providing our students, more hands-on learning and project-based learning experiences? What would it look like if we actually were able to think about learning as the focus versus just seat time as the focus? And so those are some of the questions that we're going to be, launching into and really thinking about. As far as summer goes, we're still going to be waiting for some of the guidance that comes out from the governor. And so we have some plans in place to be able to provide some summer school opportunities for our students. We know if any of our students receive incompletes, during this time frame, we're going to be really working to ensure that especially our high school students are able to make up those incompletes as quickly as possible and pick up, where they left off, so that we don't have them, have that as a burden over their head. And then as soon as we're able to start to bring some students together, we do plan on having, some small group, instruction as best as possible. So we have some summer school plans that are in works. And as I keep saying, we have plans on top of plans because all of it is based on the guidance that we're going to be receiving.
One last question before we move on to our next speaker is around graduating seniors and also the incoming juniors and seniors that are on a pipeline for testing for college admission and things like that. How has this disrupted, and how have students in the district compensated for testing timelines, application deadlines, and of the like? And how are we keeping those folks that are about to exit the school district on track?
Yeah, and so our senior plan is a really robust plan. If you go to our Bellevue School District webpage and go to our current COVID-19 page, there's a lot of information around what we've been doing to support our seniors. But, we have really been doing everything we can to support our students. The AP exam changed their approach. They went to an online model, so we were able to help prepare our students for that. Some of the other big assessments were delayed, but we basically have really been working with every one of our seniors to make sure that we have a pretty solid plan in place to make sure that nothing was going to hold them back. We also have been thinking a lot around our juniors and other students, because this is going to affect them down the road also, and so we've been having a lot of plans in place to be able to help them in that area.
Great. Well, Dr. Duran, thank you. I'm sure we'll have some more questions on the back end, but I'm going to get us to our last speaker today, who's been very excited to jump on, and I've seen her pop on and off several times. That's okay. I'd like to welcome Linsday Hunsicker. She's a senior program officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She is a celebrated leader in education policy, serving the foundation's federal education advocacy priorities, and also previously serving as a senior education policy advisor to U.S. Senator Mike Enzi. However, for today, her greatest qualification is probably that she is mom of school-aged kids in the public schools here on the East Side. And I know that many on the line, myself included, can relate to what that is all about. I have probably 3 separate locked doors and a baby gate between me and my children right now, and I'm sure they'll be busting in at any moment. Linsday, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate the warm welcome, Joe, and it's just really an honor to be here with Secretary Hunter and Dr. Duran to talk a little bit about some of the work that the foundation has been doing with the COVID-19 response, and it's really been a global response to this. We have offices that span the globe, and so we really began tracking this in early January with the breakout in the Wuhan province, and have been doing just a lot of work since then. We have a dedicated COVID-19 response team that has not only responded globally with both a lot of work around vaccine development, treatment development, and other things, but also a lot of local response that really ranged from seconding staff into the Seattle King County Public Health Department to help them think about what some of the impacts were going to be for the health of the community, but then also working with our philanthropic partners, as you saw the All in Seattle effort stand up to think about how are we really meeting the needs of those in the community. And you have seen just tremendous response to that from Washingtonians across the state. And there are now efforts to think even further about how do we expand that so it's not just an all in Seattle effort, but what would a potential all in Washington effort or something similar be? Most recently, we launched Power Of. It's a new online platform that connects people to make a difference with organizations addressing the impacts of COVID-19. So it's a giving platform, but it's also a platform where you can learn about different volunteer opportunities that not only span the country, but you can also get very local. So here in Washington, our work has centered in a number of different areas. We've been working to provide some support to specifically Seattle Public Schools, but also within the roadmap region. As you heard from Dr. Duran, I've been in many conversations thinking with OSPI about how we can potentially help provide support either via our global health experts, our epidemiologists that we have on staff. I'm certainly not one, but know some who are, of how do we really focus on those public health and safety requirements of opening school. It's really, I've thought about it in 3 phases of how do you look at between now and June 19th, which is the last day of school, how do you look at summer, and then how do you look at the opening of school with really those public health and safety guidelines being front and center of that work. And then even when we get that, we then have to think about what does school look like when we open in the fall, and what are all of those supports, as you've seen in the chat today, that students, parents, and teachers are really going to need when we enter into the classroom. Things like, how do you diagnose where students are? What did they learn in the prior year? And what are some of the catch-up opportunities that we may need to provide for them as they're coming back into school? What are some of the best-in-class models for that type of learning? How do we really, one of the grants that I'm working on is with Center for Strengthening the Teaching Profession, which is here in Washington State, about how do you develop both some synchronous and asynchronous learning opportunities for teachers on all of these various learning management systems and platforms that they're being asked to use that many have not received formal training on. And so how is it something that you can get either lots of support or no support or one-on-one support? But and then from the parent perspective, I live in Bellevue, but I'm in that really weird little strand of Bellevue that we're in the Renton School District. And so I have to say that Dr. Patnott and his team have put together just phenomenal plans for supporting families and students during this time. But it is overwhelming as a parent to be asked to look at up to 4 different platforms and helping to support my daughter in her learning, and to have them often sitting immediately next to me. I have bribed them to be away during this time, so hopefully that sticks. But as I said, we also have our local response has been not only in supporting education efforts and supporting public health in Seattle and King County, but it's also been looking at how do we pivot what was the Seattle flu study into now the Seattle Coronavirus Assessment Network, which is tracking COVID in the Seattle region to really give us better information on how the virus spreads, to inform, again, all of our public health experts. We've been providing support to homeless service providers, which is something we had done a lot of work around in our prior strategies and have continued that. But then also providing just dollars into the various community foundations across the state. And then I will close with this, Joe, and I think you had a couple of questions, and I think that Dr. Duran really started to highlight this, is a lot of our teams, we have teams focused in early learning, K through 12, and then also post-secondary, are thinking about how does this then transform public education systems overall. This has done a lot to really expose just the tremendous inequities in our systems. And you've seen it certainly with access to technology, but also connectivity issues. And you've seen it across the state of not only families and students, but also teachers. There are areas of the state that just don't have broadband available for teachers to even connect with their students. And so how do we think about that? But then also how do we think about how we deliver education to our children every day? And how do we think about the use of technology to support what that teacher does in the class every day, knowing how critical that teacher really is to student learning over time? And then how do we think about student pathways in a different way? You heard Dr. Duran again talked about that hands-on learning or career and technical education, or even exposure to that. I like to think of some of the initial efforts that are underway in the state with Career Connect Washington, and how can that really be jump-started potentially by this, I've heard the term crisis-tunity of looking at how we can potentially change and really shift these systems to improve student outcomes overall.
That's fantastic. I mean, that is a laundry list of work right there. And all being done from folks' kitchen counters and home offices. I might add. One question that I wanted to ask you, because you've been around education policy for a long time, is, in the stories that you're hearing right now, and as you're talking with educators, as you're looking at what the foundation's doing, is there anything that's truly novel, truly different, that captures that crisis-tunity phrase you just coined? Any examples out there that you can think of, or things that are in the pipeline that maybe not be game changers, but could be something that hasn't been tried before that folks could be excited about?
Sure, and actually there's one here even locally. Impact Public Schools has actually taken to utilizing a local radio station to connect teachers with their students. So it's something that's about as are some of our oldest technology that is out there, but still gives you that real time. It's not it's not interactive really at all, but still, so that students and children, because they're in elementary school, can still hear their teacher and be read a story during the day when, at least most of them have one parent at home and they're all working. They have 80% low income students in their building. And so that's one piece that I've heard. And then I've also heard about schools just already having platforms that were very technology dominated, and that those systems have really been able to shift almost overnight, and their students have not missed a beat. This has, as you heard Dr. Hunter or Secretary Hunter talk about earlier, this does not work with little kids. I have a 5-year-old. I cannot place them in front of a computer for very long, but for our high school students in particular, I think the biggest piece that they're missing then is not only that that personal connection with both students and teachers, but also that hands-on learning that I talked about earlier.
Well, I know that we've got some more questions that have come in, and so that will be for all of the panelists that are still here, and we want to be respectful of the 3 o'clock deadline. But I'll throw this question back to Dr. Duran really quickly. Equity has been something that has been talked about a lot in today's webcast, and we know that that's one of the driving missions of state education policy is to close the opportunity gap. Specifically, when we're talking about technology access, how many families in the Bellevue School District, in the area that you run, how many families would you estimate are without either internet access or adequate technology to be able to connect with the way that studies have gone in this district recently?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, is one we're trying to dig in a little bit deeper into because we've distributed, over 400 hotspots right now. So we know at least that number is pretty solid and is definitely there. But we also know we've heard from many of our students and families that are actually going and sitting outside of our school buildings because they're still able to access Wi-Fi. And we have, relatively, fast connections here. We've heard of students and families going and sit outside of libraries and other places where they can access Wi-Fi. So I don't have a specific number around how many of our families and students don't have the internet access, but we know that it is a definite need. The other thing that I think is important is that beyond just even the access, one of the things that we have realized is that the further away that our educators are from the city center here in Bellevue in Seattle as a metropolitan area, the worse the Wi-Fi connectivity is, the worse the broadband is. And so, as a reminder for our chamber audience, 35% of our staff members live in Bellevue, 65% live outside of Bellevue. And so the further away they are, the worse the connectivity is. And so this idea around having people even doing the event that we're doing right now, it's not going to be the same experience for someone's in a rural community. And so there's definitely a big need in this area. And again, I'll just, want to shout out our city manager and our mayor and city council, for all the work that they're doing. We're definitely been having conversations around what we can do to try to add, more broadband access into areas where we know that we need it.
I want to head back to Secretary Hunter for a second. One of the things that Dr. Duran brought up was about the workforce and where it comes from. The workforce in our certificated classrooms in the K-12 system sometimes looks a little different and has some higher standards, at least traditionally, than the workforce in the early education. So what's the pipeline for early education professionals right now, given the lower average pay, given the fact that many of them have been furloughed? I know a lot of them are on unemployment right now. How do we hold on to those individuals that have that are in that profession and make sure that they actually come back? Not necessarily the operators or the providers, but the actual teachers in the classroom. Is there any effort to make sure that we can hold them into the profession?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are some efforts that we're undertaking. Trying to keep providers open and serving children means they have to have staff. So trying to keep the cash flowing to providers is a key first step from us. The federal level, the PPP program, I know there are some providers that are using that. It will make less sense for ones that are not remaining open. That's sort of the point. Is to try and keep your staff employed. Those are short-term efforts. So I think you point to a longer-term problem of how do we actually get a high-quality workforce or retain one, grow one in the early learning field. And we're going to face this in a lot of places as we come out of this pandemic. How are we going to actually have an economy that works for everybody? And what we have now is we have a pipeline where we have a program at all of the community colleges except one that has a set of stackable certificates so people can get credits from one place to another, trade them, go back and forth, but keep moving forward and get it in towards getting their degree. They'll need an AA degree to teach in our ECAP program. They need a BA to teach in a Head Start program. We'd love to get to the point where we could require a BA. We don't pay enough and there isn't enough supply to do that. So we'll need to raise salaries at the high end of that in order to get people to have it make economic sense for them to invest in that much education. And there's enormous amounts of research that says having specific education in the early learning field makes a difference in outcomes for children. So we've been trying to push the professional development elements, and we're going to continue to do that because we care about getting kids ready for kindergarten.
I'm going to turn to Linsday for the last word today, and we'll definitely take it very home, which is, what is your either lesson learned or your best advice for the new-aged homeschool teacher right now, which we all are. I wish that I could say I spent more than 20 minutes on the alphabet worksheets today before I grabbed the Kindle and threw him on Stinky and Dirty for a couple of episodes. What's your advice for families with school-age kids at home right now?
So I think the number one piece of advice is just to give yourself a lot of space and grace during this time. I mean, if everybody on this webinar right now is like me, your demands at work seem to have quintupled over time, and the amount of time that you're spending staring at a computer screen is a little absurd during the course of the day. And then for me and my children, it's worked about, I show them, here is my schedule. This is when mommy really needs to concentrate. And then here are the things that you need to do. And as soon as you're done with these, then the time is yours. And for my children, that has worked. Other friends have Post-its up on the wall that are like, these are the activities that you need to do, but they're yours in terms of when you place them throughout the day. And so I think it's finding that rhythm and finding that the treats and the temptations too of how can I bribe my children to be quiet, which I'm sure you're starting to hear them not be so quiet right now. It's been an hour. That's about as much as I get. And then I'm lucky to work in a place that is just so accepting of knowing that my daughter is often sitting next to me doing her schoolwork while we're also on a team meeting. And I will put myself on mute and you will see me talking to her and helping her while I am also listening. But it's a big juggling act. I wish I had better advice for everyone out there.
Well, I think it's the best advice is to give ourselves a little bit of grace and a little bit of space, and be sparing with the duct tape.
Exactly.
But I want to thank all of our speakers, all of our panelists here today. It's been great over the last few weeks being able to bring so many experts in their field on to talk with thousands of folks that watch these videos on a regular basis. But we do, I believe, cross my fingers, have our sponsor on the line, and I want to give a quick moment for the Vice President of Communications at Puget Sound Energy to share a moment with us. Andy, if you are available, I hope. Are you there? Oh, was so confident this time. Well, there will be plenty of opportunities to make up for that, and we'll make sure that we get Andy on in the future. Puget Sound Energy has been not only an extraordinary supporter of the Chamber and of the programs that we're putting on, but they've been an extraordinary supporter of so many of the nonprofit organizations that are operating on the East Side. They immediately not only got into action, as they always do, to maintain reliable service, power service to the East Side, and throughout the Puget Sound region. But they've also very quickly got engaged in all of the nonprofits that they've traditionally been engaged with to make sure that they could get more of the resources they needed up front to continue their mission. So a huge and hearty thank you to the leadership at Puget Sound Energy. And we'll be hearing from them more on the 21st when the new CEO of Puget Sound Energy comes to share her thoughts on the future of energy. And so you'll be able to register for that here at the end of the webcast. So again, thank you again for joining us today. We've got a full lineup of these events in the weeks ahead, starting this coming Tuesday when the East King Chambers Coalition will host key Washington state legislators on the Budget and Finance Committee as they tackle the estimated $7 billion plus of deficits facing the state. Then on Thursday, we'll get back to our Back to Work series, and we'll do a deep dive into personal protective equipment, social distancing, and the new office workplace environment with industry experts from Kidder Matthews and Herman Miller. You can register for all of these programs at the conclusion of this webcast or at any time at bellevuechamber.org. Thanks again to Puget Sound Energy and to all of our Bellevue Chamber members. A special thanks to the City of Bellevue, who have done an extraordinary job under the leadership of the mayor, the council, and Brad Miyake, the city manager, to really react quickly to support the local community, local nonprofits, and local businesses. At this time, it's really a blessing to be in the city of Bellevue and to be working with such a great team. So until we see you next week, stay safe. And if you have kids at home, stay sane. Thanks for joining.